What's going on, man? Welcome back to the basement. I'm Ron, and generally speaking, you should be avoiding the running back dead zone in your fantasy drafts, but I also don't believe in hard and fast rules. You're going to find yourself in a spot where maybe the way the board is falling or the wide receiver value that you already got early on in a draft is going to push you in the direction of taking a running back in that dead zone in the middle round. So I want to make sure you're as prepared as possible for when that happens and you know which running backs to take. So today, we're going to do a full autopsy of the running back dead zone. We have all the Google Sheets set up. We're going to talk through the running backs you need to stop drafting in the dead zone and should be avoiding, and then also highlight 5 targets where if I had to draft a running back in the dead zone, these would be those 5. All I ask is these videos take a lot of time to make. We do a ton of research, so make sure if you enjoy, subscribe, leave a like. Let's go.
Like this froze, ice cold, ice around my body like I'm frozen.
Now we had to do some setup to get to a spot where we can define what the running back dead zone is in 2024 and who qualifies. I will say, if you just want the player takes, I will have timestamps down below where you can just skip ahead where I break down the players. Now, when we talk about the running back dead zone, it's a tricky thing. Right now, running backs are going as late as ever. We have just 12 running backs inside of the top 3 rounds over in sleeper drafts. 3 years ago, that number was 18. So the question becomes, where is the dead zone? Does it still exist? Because we have this push and pull happening where wide receivers are getting pushed up, running backs getting pushed down, and that means you are drafting running backs who used to go in the 3rd round in the 4th or 5th round in 2024. And with that new price, does that make them fine bets to make in your fantasy drafts? And how we answered that question is we found a combined range of where running backs are going in 2024 over on Sleeper and ESPN, 2 of the most popular platforms out there. And what I did is I just found rough ranges for each round. So round 1, there's about 6 running backs going there. Round 2, RB 5 through 10. Round 3, RB 10 through 15, and so on. The idea here is that, yes, there's some overlap, but it's just an idea to get a broad range of what drafts look like this year so that we can go back in time and compare the RB6 in ADP in a given year instead of comparing round 3 running backs to round 3 running backs this year. Because like we said, a round 3 running back 3 years ago is not a round 3 running back in 2024. So we went back, we found the combined ranges for wide receivers as well, and then we went to Destination Devy, which has a war machine tool, wins above replacement, which is just a way of figuring out how much a player impacts your team in terms of winning compared to a replacement level player at that position. What it allows us to do is we can then compare players across positions where we can see running back versus wide receiver without just using raw points per game, because there's more to that equation with flex spots and the replacement level players and like how many usable players there are in the player pool. And what this gives us is the wins above replacement on average for each position by round in this new 2024 environment, right? Where 6 running backs go in the 1st round, 8 wide receivers in the 1st round, wide receiver 9 through 14 in round 2, RB 5 through 10 in round 2. And we can sort of see, even with these new prices where wide receivers are more expensive and running backs are cheaper, how does the wins above replacement equation look? And now we went all the way back to 2019, so the last 5 years. And to me, I believe that there still is a running back dead zone, as we have highlighted in red here, where in round 4, the wide receivers are so good. They have an average wins above replacement of 1.4, which is actually more than the round 2 and round 3 wide receivers, which is what we've been saying before with the Double Hero RB video. Rounds 1 through 3, you should really be prioritizing running backs, especially rounds 2 and 3. But you can see it shifts to wide receivers in round 4. And then round 5 and 6, it's a little bit more even. But I would still call round 5 and 6 the dead zone because wide receivers are still outmatching them in wins above replacement. And then also, round 7 and 8 running backs are just as good, right? 0.08 wins above replacement for round 5 and 6. Round 7 and 8 is 0.05. So we're talking like 0.03 of wins above replacement of a difference. So it's just not a big enough drop off for me to want to prioritize running backs in that range. Now, at the final column, you'll see wins above replacement plus minus. And that's just the difference between running back and wide receiver. And the 2 biggest discrepancies are round 4, 5, and 6. So now we know this is the running back dead zone. We can define that as RB 13 to 24 in this year's ADP. And if we look back at last year, just to get acquainted with what the dead zone looks like, last year, Alexander Mattison, Aaron Jones, Miles Sanders, J.K. Dobbins, Cam Akers, Dameon Pierce. Some of these guys just don't work out. Some of them get hurt. And the profiles are tricky too, right? Etienne was a huge hit who we were all over, but we weren't on Joe Mixon because for every Joe Mixon, there's in Miles Sanders, Alexander Mattison of just like volume dependent workhorses. And then also with Etienne, Dameon Pierce was also a similar profile, like a young ascending profile, and he busted. So it's really tough. It's very tricky in this range, but again, you're going to be in drafts where you have to take one. So I wanted to look at what the hits look like. So if we do have to take a running back in the dead zone, we are making smart bets. Now, we need to define what a hit in the running back dead zone is, and I am calling these running backs exceptional running backs. I'll be honest, I'm not sold on the name yet. You can feel free to comment a different one, but the idea is that they are the exception you are making in the dead zone. Exceptional running backs. And we have 84 running backs since 2015 to get drafted in that RB 13 to 24 area in terms of ADP. And then we sorted by wins above replacement. And what I'm doing for exceptional running backs is anybody with a 1.4 or better wins above replacement is an exceptional running back. And what this is just, are you impacting your team in a big way? Are you making a difference? Because we don't want to just aim for a single, right? This is a range where we are foregoing elite tight ends, elite quarterbacks, really good receiver profiles. We don't want to aim for like 11 or 12 points per game. We want a player who's making a real impact on your lineup. And then also 1.4, it's a little bit arbitrary, but also 1.4 is the wins above replacement that we saw for round 4 receivers. So that's like a decent barometer of like what a really good pick looks like for a running back. And then you can also see with Kenyon Drake, it's a pretty big drop off down to ETN in 2022. So what we found is when we use that threshold, we have 17 running backs since 2017 that fit our definition of an exceptional running back. These players, again, 1.4 better wins above replacement, and were drafted as the RB 13 to 24 in their given year. Now, this is loaded. We're going to go through it. Don't worry. We have this list sorted by points per game. We have their volume and team environment, right? So weighted opportunities, that's just carries and targets with more weight towards targets because we want PPR points, targets per game, offensive points for, right? We want touchdowns. Now, I want to kind of talk through the two different profiles that you're seeing in the dead zone here. First, you have like the young studs, right? We have Derrick Henry, Jonathan Taylor, Aaron Jones, Najee Harris as a rookie, Joe Mixon in his second year. And I think this is the group we really want to be targeting in the dead zone due to their upside, right? We don't want to be prioritizing the next Mark Ingram 14 point per game season at age 30. We want to be prioritizing these young studs that are kind of not coming out of nowhere, but are ascending in the dead zone and are only in the dead zone for questions of, can they become a mainstay in fantasy football? And we can see when we sort by points per game here, the top 5 point per game running backs on this list were in their first 4 seasons or 25 years or younger, and 8 of the top 9 running backs on this list in points per game were in their first 4 seasons or 25 years or younger. And this allows us to aim for the next Josh Jacobs pretty much, where I have our research here skewed towards this cohort of this list because the other guys are a little bit lower ceiling, and for every, Leonard Fournette in 2022 and every Mark Ingram in 2019, you get a Le'Veon Bell on the Jets, you get a Todd Gurley on the Falcons, you get a Melvin Gordon on Denver. So I can live with mixing on next year's Joe Mixon, and if we had this data set up in a way where we were aiming for 2023 Joe Mixon and 2019 Mark Ingram, and then also 2019 Aaron Jones, 2019 Derrick Henry, the data would be getting pulled in so many different directions, it would be kind of a mess. So we really want to be aiming for, again, like that Aaron Jones through Travis Etienne last year of your young, ascending, uncertain running backs where it's like, man, we haven't seen them take that next step, so we're going to price them in the running back dead zone. Historically speaking, these are the running backs that are massive, massive hits in this area. Now, I will say as well, you'll see Nick Chubb on this list and be like, why was he ever here? It was because Kareem Hunt was a top 30 running back pick in 2022, and that pushed Nick Chubb into this area. So that gives us the components of an exceptional running back in fantasy football. And these players, right, the guys who make it out of the dead zone alive, usually have 13 or more weighted opportunities per game, 3 or more targets per game, a top 20 scoring offense. They're in their 4th year or younger, and they are 25 years old or younger. We want to be prioritizing youth. We want to be prioritizing pass catching, volume, and high scoring offenses. It's pretty simple, but that is the recipe to have one of those Jonathan Taylor, Derrick Henry, first time huge breakouts where you get a massive win in the dead zone. And now we are going to apply this to rounds 4, 5, and 6 in this given year, RB 13 to 24 in ADP. And that gives us this screenshot here, where it is just a loaded thing to look at here. And this is consensus ADP. I do want to point that out, where I took CBS, Underdog, ESPN, and Yahoo, and it spit out a rough estimate of kind of what the running backs that are getting drafted in these ranges are. Here, we have rounds 4 and 5, and we have each component broken down. We do have asterisks here, where if a category has one asterisk, I'm using Mike Clay projections for the volume stats. For the top 20 scoring offenses, shout out at Connor Allen NFL over on Twitter. He has a really good thread on breaking down Vegas projected scoring for each team. So we found everything that we need to see heading into 2024. And then also you'll see simple total and weighted total. If you hit the criteria, you get a green box. If you just barely missed it, you get a yellow box. And if you missed it, you get a white box. And then what I took is simple total. As you can see with James Cook here, he hits all of them, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's his simple total. And then his weighted total is just pretty much your percentage adjusted for that. So his first box is 88%. That's 8.8. His second box is 76%. That's 7.6, 7.6, 7.1, 6.5, and so on. And then if you got a yellow box for one of those, it's just half of the percentage. So half of 7.6, which I think is like, 3.8? So there's that. That gives us this. And now it's time to finally break down the running back dead zone in 2024. Now, before we talk about the players that I think that you should be targeting here, drafting when you have to, I wanted to just kind of break down the landscape as a whole and just sort of give you guys some takeaways. I would say, I think the clear fade for me in this area, especially someone who's going to be going like round 3 or 4 in your home leagues, is Alvin Kamara. Very clear fade. All he gets is volume. He does not hit your top 20 scoring offense. He is old at this point, and he is also declining in terms of efficiency. This is a good tweet from Jacob Gibbs here. Alvin Kamara's avoided tackle rate by season just continues to plummet. It was like a bottom 6 number last year, and I just don't see the upside. The vibes out of New Orleans aren't great either. I could see them shutting down Derek Carr at a certain point and giving Spencer Rattler the reins. I could see Dennis Allen getting fired as early as like whenever his bye week is. It's not great. The offensive line isn't good either. I believe Trevor Penning's like a huge bust for them that he's playing. I believe it's starting right tackle. They have like a rookie left tackle, Fuanga. So it's a really tough offense. He could maybe be a PPR scam again like he was last year, but I would just be avoiding at this point in his career. Now, the other running backs I wanted to cover before we get into the targets here are Joe Mixon and Rachaad White. These guys aren't avoids or targets for me, but there is significant downside, especially with Joe Mixon as somebody who is changing teams. This is a great tweet from Dwayne McFarland where he looked at the correlation in year-over-year stability of running backs changing teams. And you can see here, when you look at same team running backs versus new team running backs, a lot of the times when a player changes teams, their role changes significantly based on what we thought was going to happen. Again, we've seen this before. Even if not volume, then efficiency goes down, right? The PPR points where we've seen, again, Le'Veon Bell on my Jets, Todd Gurley on the Falcons, Melvin Gordon on the Broncos, and the list goes on and on. It's not great, but he's on a good offense, and you'll catch passes, get volume, and he's probably a decent bet to do what he did last year, just a really shaky floor with Joe Mixon. Then we also have Rachaad White, who I've been very harsh on. I had him as a fade prior to this video. I would now have him as like a fine pick. He's not a target for me. He's not an avoid. Rachaad White's probably fine. You can see here he hits pretty much every box besides top 20 scoring offense. And last year he had terrible efficiency metrics, but you can also sell yourself on the idea that the Tampa Bay offensive line finished dead last in run block win rate over on ESPN Analytics. If that bounces back this year, which established the run has him as the 16th best offensive line, people are raving about this first round center, Graham Barton, they drafted. So very well, he could be a guy who hits in a big way, right, where he's young, there's pass catching upside, but it's just very rare you're as inefficient as he was last year, and you just like somehow get the same volume and bounce back in the efficiency department. I actually really like Bucky Irving. Of course, Bucky Irving's not going to give you 20 plus touches a game, but he's going to be a real thorn in the side of Rachaad White. And there's also the downside that without Dave Canales there, the head coach now for the Carolina Panthers, that kind of revived Baker's career, this offense could just completely crater, and that is also scary. Now, when we talk about the targets in this range and guys that I'm actually looking to draft, the first one is very easy, and that is James Cook. He is, to me, if you find yourself in a spot, or maybe you're in like a half PPR, 2 running back, 2 wide receiver, 1 flex, and you find yourself in a spot in round 4 where it's time to take a running back, you can't just keep taking wide receivers, I think James Cook is a really, really good pick. He is the biggest target on this whole list, and as you can see here, he hits everything. Weighted opportunities per game, 3+ targets per game, really good offense. He's young. He has it all. And then we also break down how he looked last year, and there's a lot of stuff to really like here. Last year, their offensive coordinator, Ken Dorsey, got fired, and then Joe Brady came in week 11 on as offensive coordinator. And from then on, James Cook was at 16.7 points per game with a 1,700-yard scrimmage pace, which is just absolutely bonkers. I will say as well, we're recording this at like 7 a.m. and the sun's coming in on me. Just gloss over it. Bear with me here, people. But this is a guy who's going to be the receiving back on a Bills team, projected for the 5th most points by Vegas. And then you also have Joe Brady, the offensive coordinator, who wants to run the ball like we saw, but then also has given a lot of targets and receptions to his running backs. He has coached previously the Panthers, LSU, and the Saints. He has gotten all those guys to huge reception totals in CEH at LSU, Alvin Kamara on the Saints, Christian McCaffrey on the Panthers, and then Cook is also verifiably good. Last year, he was second with the most rushes over 10 or more yards. He was top 10 in yards per carry and top 10 in yards per reception. I don't know how rare that is, but that's crazy in terms of efficiency. And then also he leads all running backs over the last 2 years in rushing yards over expected per attempt. He is really good, really efficient, really explosive. And with Joe Brady, this is somebody, as outlined by Jacob Gibbs here, that wants to run the ball a lot in the red zone, where if you look at Ken Dorsey offenses, it's a little bit lower, but with Joe Brady, 55.6% situation neutral pass rate. All right, so they're going to run the ball a good bit. But the biggest thing here is 36 passing touchdowns to 42 rushing touchdowns with a 39% red zone pass rate. That was lower than Jim Harbaugh with the 49ers, who was a world-renowned running game enthusiast, I guess you could say. So it's pretty crazy. He wants to run the ball inside. Of course, Josh Allen will take away touchdowns, but if James Cook can earn a goal line role, he's going to smash. If James Cook doesn't earn the goal line role and it's Ray Davis or it's Josh Allen, he can still challenge for like 80-plus receptions. This is a guy who has been top 5 in running back ADOT over the last 2 years. He is not just a check down merchant. He is a legitimate receiving threat out of the backfield. And on a roster where the wide receiver 1 is like Keon Coleman, who I like, but still rookie wide receiver, Curtis Samuel, Khalil Shakir, it wouldn't be all that shocking for James Cook to potentially like maybe not lead the team in targets, but put up a pretty crazy target total on this offense. Now, after that, we have Kenneth Walker. He hasn't been an avoid for me, but he just hasn't really been on my radar this year as like a real target. And this really opened my eyes. Now, I do want to say, after I do these research videos, I go straight over to my rankings over on patreon.com, and I update my rankings. Kenneth Walker is 100% a guy who will be moving up my rankings based on this research. So if you want updated rankings with all this research in mind, make sure you check out patreon.com/Ron Stewart. You can find the link in the description or the comment section down below. I have a top 200 rankings cheat sheet. They're tiered, and then also my targets and fades are listed on there as well. Now, when we talk about Kenneth Walker, you guys saw in the legendary wide receiver video, I'm all in on this Seahawks offense. Ryan Grubb is coming in, I believe, in a Geno Smith bounce back. This Washington offense is going to be really fun, or Washington inspired, right? Ryan Grubb was the offensive coordinator over at Washington in college. He's going to come over to the Seahawks and bring a lot of modern concepts there. Now, when we talk about Kenneth Walker, it's really important to understand that last year he was so banged up. I have a tough time taking any of what he did last year seriously. He had calf soreness in week 8, then chest soreness, then strained oblique, then bruised shoulder. He was all over the place. You had Geno Smith missing games and bringing in Drew Lock. The Seahawks were kind of a mess last year. But in 2024, when we do this research, Kenneth Walker smashes everything. He's going to get the weighted opportunities per game. He's in a top 20 scoring offense. He's year 4 earlier, 25 years old or younger. And then the only thing he doesn't hit is 3+ targets per game. But he just barely misses that at 2.8, so we give him a yellow box. And then also, we're getting a lot of real buzz right now on him getting receiving work. And I don't think it's all that crazy for a new offensive coordinator who didn't draft these players or have any preconceived notions about like Zach Charbonnet or Kenneth Walker, just comes into camp and ends up liking Kenneth Walker as a receiver. He said, Ryan Grubb, on Kenneth Walker here, I think he gets better every single day. I think the sky's the limit for him. I think he's a really, really talented, powerful back that's a true 3-tool guy. He's electric out of the backfield as a pass catcher. Then we have the data side of it from Fantasy Points data here. The previous quote was from the Coach Speak Index. Ken Walker receiving efficiency in 2023. He was 8th in yards per out run, 2nd in missed tackles forced per reception, 2nd in yards after catch per reception. So it wouldn't be all that crazy. Again, he's not going to get 60+ catches, but he could very easily get like a 40+ catch season, kind of like Jonathan Taylor did in his RB1 overall season, and just get there on monster efficiency like we've seen from Nick Chubb, Derrick Henry. There are some people out there that believe that Kenneth Walker is on that level as a pure rusher. In And it's not all that crazy. This is somebody who, since getting drafted, misses all running backs and missed tackles for. Shout out to Ryan Heath here. And then he also had the third most rushes of 15 or more yards in 2022. So he has breakaway ability, missed tackles forced. He can do it all. If he adds pass catching on top in a pretty good offense here, it's wheels all the way up for Kenneth Walker in 2024. Then our last target here is a little bit off the beaten path, but we'll go Josh Jacobs. Off the beaten path in terms of this research where we're prioritizing youth. This is a running back going into year 6, but he's also just a year removed from 19 points per game on 2.5 fantasy points over expected per game. So that's just your efficiency, which is a lot based on your expected output, how much are you outproducing that. He outproduced his expected output by 2.5 fantasy points per game. The issue is that he followed it up last year with minus 2.4 FPOE per game, one of the worst in the NFL last year. It's really bad in terms of efficiency, but he was also in a terrible offense. He had the highest average defenders inside the box with 7.2 last year. And then he also had a weird contract dispute where he wasn't a part of training camp last year. So he had a lot of stuff going against him, bad environment, didn't get a full ramp up here. And I think there's still upside that at 26 years old, right, he hits a yellow box there. He has the targets, the weighted opportunities. He's in a good offense to bounce back here, where at just 26 years old, a year removed from a really good year, efficiency bounces up and down year over year. It wouldn't be all that shocking to see him get back up to where he was in 2022. And then you also have the fact that his running back mates aren't that great. Marshawn Lloyd seems like Kendre Miller 2.0, where now he has 2 injuries already this offseason and is kind of buried on the depth chart. A.J. Dillon, we've already seen what he can do. He is a replacement level back at best. And then Josh Jacobs is very exciting for what he can do in this scheme. We had Matt Harmon and Nate Tice talk about this idea that LaFleur, who comes from the Rams, could transition to a more man gap heavy scheme with Josh Jacobs and Marshawn Lloyd. And that would be huge for Josh Jacobs, where on zone rush attempts, he's in the 27th percentile, according to Jacob Gibbs. In man gap schemes, he's in the 89th percentile in terms of EPA per rush, which is really good. And if this actually happens and we see LaFleur kind of take from the Rams running game and not only use man and gap schemes, but then also use like a true bell cow like Sean McVay has been doing, that would be huge for Josh Jacobs. And I think that it's not all that wild to think so. This is a good blurb from Hayden Winks. He did an article on the week 1 preseason takeaways. Josh Jacobs had a first down carry, second down reception, and he stayed on during the third down during the Packers' 3-play scoring drive. So, of course, small sample, but that would indicate to me that he is going to be like this bell cow on the field. Like if he's going to be on the field for third downs, goal line stuff between the 20s, and then maybe even 2-minute drill, and he's like an all-purpose back every single down on a team that, since LaFleur was hired, has been second in offensive efficiency, has Jordan Love, has a good offensive line. It's kind of wheels all the way up for Josh Jacobs. The floor's a little shaky as an aging back that is switching teams, but the ceiling is also there too with Josh Jacobs, who is also on a very front-loaded contract where I believe all of his guarantees are in 2024, and he could be cut this offseason and the Packers would lose no money. So he is all bought in for this year to prove it and see what he can be in the NFL moving forward. So Josh Jacobs, not a bad pick in these middle rounds. Now, after that, we have round 6. And the takeaways here is I would say the clear avoid for me is Aaron Jones. It's tough because Aaron Jones finished really strong last year. I want to say over his last 5 games, he had over 100 total yards, but there's just a lot of downside that he's banged up again, that he's a total bust. And again, running backs changing teams, they're not a great bet. He has real competition in Ty Chandler. This team just lost J.J. McCarthy. He's just not a sexy click, and he's such a big name that in like home leagues, he's like a 5th-round pick, and I just can't get there. I will say, out of this list, there's no other super clear avoids for me. David Montgomery scores terribly, but then also Jahmyr Gibbs already has pulled his hamstring. He has like 2 or 3 hamstring injuries over the last 12 months. And anytime that he misses, David Montgomery is a top 12 running back, just given the environment of this team. So when that's on the table, I'm not fading you, right? If Jahmyr Gibbs gets a setback, David Montgomery could be getting drafted next to Isaiah Pacheco and Travis Etienne. So anybody with that kind of contingent upside, I don't really care about the rest. Then we have Ramondre. I think Ramondre Stevenson's fine. The 30-second scoring offense by Vegas does spook me a ton of just a guy that, like, efficiency could suck. If Gibson takes away the PPR ceiling, then Ramondre's a pretty brutal bet. Zamir White is here. He's not a fade or a target for me. He scores really, really well, and I should be in on him, but in the 27 scoring offense for a guy that's been like largely unproven, kind of propped up as a day 3 guy in a big role, I would just rather not. That is one of those very classic dead zone types, kind of like Alexander Madison last year. You can certainly talk yourself into Zamir White, but in home leagues where he's going to be a 6th-round pick, I'm out there. And then we also have DeAndre Swift, who I didn't include as a target here. I just can't do it. I've loved DeAndre Swift in the past. It's just like this is now his 3rd team in the NFL in 5 years. I have a hard time actually giving him a real green box for the 25 years or younger thing. Again, this is a guy, 3 different teams, 5 years. Of course, he gets the volume, and this is going to be a good offense with Caleb Williams, but I don't see them checking it down a ton. This is a team that's going to like using their tight ends. It's a team that's going to like using their 3 stud receivers, and Odunze, Keenan Allen, and DJ Moore. And then also, Swift isn't going to get all the goal line work. This is somebody who had just 2 touchdowns on 10 inside the 5 carries last year. I just can't see it. He always falls out of favor with his new coaching staffs, right? Like last year, he didn't play week 1, then he played, and then by the end of the year, he kind of fizzled out. He's just not a target for me. I can't get there on DeAndre Swift, but he's also not a fade. This has opened me up that Swift could be a good pick this year. But in terms of our targets in the round 6 dead zone area here, we have Najee Harris. Now he has just a few slight misses where 3+ targets per game, top 20 scoring offense, 25 years or older or younger. He just barely misses those, but he gets the volume. He's in year 4. And his score is pretty dang good. And just the fact that he's like pretty much super close across the board tells me that the weighted total might be doing him a little bit dirty here as somebody that's kind of flirting with all the metrics we're looking for. And I really love this fit in an Arthur Smith offense. Now, I like Jaylen Warren. I'm drafting Jaylen Warren, but you also have to understand that it would be so predictable if Twitter is screaming at the top of their lungs that Jaylen Warren is more efficient on a per-touch basis and he needs to get all the work, and Arthur Smith just says no and continues to ride Najee Harris as his bell cow in spite of what Twitter or the public thinks. And Najee Harris is a pretty good running back in his own right. He had a really strong rookie year, and we look at his efficiency from last year, he actually had some juice, where he was 15th in avoided tackle rate and 10th in yards after contact per rush, both career bests. But he now gets an Arthur Smith that is going to actually be good for him, where he has a 4.1 yards per carry on zone concept runs versus 3.67 yards per carry on man concept runs. And you can see the Arthur Smith Falcons last year were 31st in man concept running back run rate. So this is a team that's going to switch a lot to zone running with Arthur Smith, and that's going to help Najee Harris a ton and actually hurt Jaylen Warren a little bit here. So that is going to be really good for Najee. And then also you're going to have a revamped offensive line where they drafted Zach Frazier and they drafted Troy Fautanu. You also have the fact that at just 2.6 targets per game in terms of projection, that feels a little bit low. This is somebody who had like 90+ targets in his first year. It wouldn't be all that crazy if he sort of ramped that up. It's kind of a match made in heaven with Arthur Smith. This is somebody who has been top 10 in rush attempts 4 of his last 5 seasons as a play caller, and he was also top 10 in rushing yards in 4 of those 5 seasons. So there's going to be a lot of points going to the running back, a lot of volume going to the running back, and if Najee Harris is the lead running back on this team with an all-purpose skill set and is going to benefit from this new scheme with Arthur Smith, he, to me, is actually a really good pick in 2024. Now, this last pick we're going to take here as an RB Deadzone exception is James Conner. Now, this one's a little bit off the beaten path, all right? I didn't want to give all of them as just like, because then we would just be doing, okay, who is the youngest running back in the dead zone? Take those guys, which generally speaking is actually a pretty good strategy, but you're going to get like a Joe Mixon in 2023. You're going to get some of these guys that are aging, are veterans, but then they also give you really good seasons. And I wanted to give one pick for that type of season. And to me, it would be James Conner. This is somebody who's not changing teams, right? We've seen that hurt running backs in the past. He stays on the Cardinals. And James Conner was legitimately very good last year. He was 2nd in yards after contact per attempt, 4th in elusiveness rating, 5th in explosive run percentage, 5th in PFF rush grade, 6th in missed tackles forced per touch, which is pretty bonkers. And then it's also a really good rushing environment, as pointed out by Tej Seth here, where from weeks 10 through 18, this is when they had Kyler Murray. They were 9th in offensive EPA per play, which is just offensive efficiency per play. And if you look at the rushing EPA per play vertical axis here, the Cardinals were the 2nd most efficient rushing offense over that span. This new offensive coordinator, Drew Petzing, is actually pretty damn good. It's going to be a good offensive environment, a good rushing environment, and James Conner is going to be the focal point that they're just going to ride until the wheels fall off. And we've already seen Trey Benson is with the second team in preseason. He averaged like 2.6 yards per carry. He wasn't all that good. He struggled. I think he's somebody who's probably more of a 2025 play or a handcuff where if James Conner goes down, I don't really see it as Trey Benson ever taking away volume from James Conner. So James Conner, if you can get him in the 6th round, like right at the 6-7 turn, I think, as your RB1 in a 0 RB build or your RB2 in a hero RB build, I think you'll be in a really good spot, just like a steady 15 point per game running back in this range. Now, that's going to do it for us today. Again, if you enjoyed this video, a ton of research went into this. It is like 8 a.m. local here. We just streamed last night, which, by the way, make sure you check those out. We stream every single night from here through kickoff. I scheduled them about an hour before we go live. Last night, we went from like 11:30 p.m. to like midnight. But we're having fun. I appreciate all you guys watching. Again, if you enjoyed this video, a ton of research goes into these kinds of videos. Please leave a like, subscribe, and I will see y'all in the next one.
Stones, like this froze, ice cold, oh.